I've clicked on the Global Tropical Overview for August the 24th, 2023, August the 25th in the West Pacific. And today we have so many systems that we're going to be talking about that I'm going to have to leave so many timestamps in the description. So if you want to see anything of, specific of like Tropical Storm Franklin, for example, or Tropical Storm Saola near the Philippines, I'll have timestamps to those in the description. But the general overview of the tropics, going from east to west, we have still a pretty active Atlantic. We have Invest 92L here. Might have a better chance to develop in the central Atlantic as it turns north, similarly to Emily. Speaking of Emily, it is here and is now losing its chance to develop as it starts to interact with a frontal system attached to a larger extratropical system up north. We have Tropical Storm Franklin here, which has moved north of Hispaniola over the past day and will likely become a powerful hurricane off the coastline, just west of the island of Bermuda, staying far east of the United States. We have an area of interest here over Central America, which is likely to move into the Western Caribbean and may well develop into a tropical storm as it moves northwards late this weekend into next week. We have Invest 91E here off the coastline of Mexico. The system is fairly disorganized, but still has a decent shot at becoming a tropical cyclone as it holds off the shore, or tracks off the shore rather, the coastline of Mexico. And we could get some tropical storm impacts there if it does form. We also have Invest 92E. We're not really going to be going into detail on this as this is tracking out to sea, but it is likely to become a tropical cyclone in its own right out to sea in the Eastern Pacific. In the Western Pacific, we have Tropical Storm Damrey and Invest 92W in the same general spot. There's a bit of uncertainty here on exactly what's happening there, but in general, these systems are going to be tracking northwest over the coming days and could bring potential impacts to Japan this weekend or early next week. But alongside that, we are looking at potential tropical cyclone formation near the Mariana Islands, and that storm would track northwest after Tropical Storm Saola, which is here northeast of Luzon. So that's a lot of systems active. It certainly feels like the peak time of hurricane and typhoon season, but we're going to start off here in the Atlantic with Tropical Storm Franklin. This is a current visible satellite view, the close-up view here from Tropical Tidbits, and you can see generally the system is looking better than before Hispaniola, but it is still fairly disorganized and sheared. What we have is a well-defined circulation here on the western end of all this convection, and all the convective activity is pushed off to its east as we have all this westerly shear, as you can see there in the convection firing north of the center. Now, we did have recon go into the system earlier. There might be one more update. No, there isn't from this picture, but you can see generally the general picture of the center being on the western end of convection, and the strongest winds being found within that convection at about 55, maybe 60 knots. At flight level, this converts to about 60 mile per hour winds or 50 knot winds at the surface. Now, this system is being sheared, and I'll kind of spoiled the end there, but you can see why on the 200 millibar flow from the European model. There's this general large ridge here over the Caribbean, and on the northern end of it, there is some westerly flow impinging upon the storm. Now, over the coming days, this whole pattern is going to shift a little bit. This upper trough, which helped bring it north of Hispaniola, is going to continue backing southwest over Mexico, and this ridge is going to move east and favor the system over the western Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico. Near Franklin, we're going to get an upper trough forming off the coastline of the southeastern U.S. over the Turks and Caicos and Bahamas, and we're going to start seeing a more favorable upper level pattern, and you'll see that play out here. That trough moves back in the Bay of Campeche, ridging takes place over our Caribbean system, and here's this upper trough here and a more favorable look aloft for Franklin. And by this time, when we have this greater divergence aloft, we're likely to see greater intensification here. And models do agree that we are likely to see significant intensification here. We might see Franklin become, or at least make a run at, the first major hurricane of the season in the Atlantic. Now, of course, the question is, how far will it come to Bermuda? The current track consensus today has been generally west of Bermuda, and that's been the case yesterday as well. And the National Hurricane Center is taking that envelope for their forecast cone. This is their latest cone from the 5 p.m. advisory. And you can see here the general track taking it northeastwards and then making that northwestwards turn as that upper trough digs in west of the storm. And then we start seeing significant intensification here. Now, they have a peak forecast of about 110 miles per hour. That seems like a fair forecast given the current guidance. But as I said, this system could make its way to the first major hurricane of the season. Now, Bermuda is still in the forecast cone, so there is still that potential that the system comes closer to you all. If it does deviate a little bit further east on this cone, remember this cone depicts where the center could be at any point here on the times list on the side. So there is still potential that the center comes close, but even if the center does take this track like the National Hurricane Center forecast cone, impacts are still likely. Here's the tropical storm force wind potential. You can see a 40 to 50% chance there in Bermuda. So if you are going to prepare for this storm, for the tropical storm force winds, you should probably get your preparations done by, say, Saturday night. Some of the tropical storm force winds may arrive as early as Sunday morning local time. Now, aside from wind impacts, we could also see significant surf impacts. Here's the GFS model significant wave height product. You can see the storm moving here west of Bermuda, and you can see the significant wave heights there that can lead to pretty rough surf along the coastline. And alongside that, it can lead to rip currents, though I'd say the rip current issue is mainly a concern for those along the U.S. We're still likely to have some strong winds and rainfall in Bermuda, so I wouldn't imagine a lot of people are going to go to the beach. But for those along the eastern U.S., we're not expecting any significant impacts from this. This system will not make landfall in the United States. Just given the current pattern, we're going to have a big trough digging in over the Great Lakes, cooling down a lot of the Great Lakes in the northeast from the current heat wave, and that will track the system out to sea. Now, there is a bit of uncertainty on exactly how far southeast or northwest the system is relative to Atlantic Canada. Some models do have the system getting close to Atlantic Canada, like the GFS, and in that scenario, we could get some adverse impacts of tropical storm force winds potentially, and some high surf on the coastline. So stay tuned to the Canadian Hurricane Center for that in your local weather offices. And for those along the east coast of the United States, stay tuned to the local National Weather Service offices for your location. They'll have the latest information on rip currents there. And for Bermuda, stay tuned to the Bermuda Weather Service and the National Hurricane Center advisories so you can know what exactly is happening with Franklin as it comes through. So that's Franklin here. Now we're going to be moving to the Caribbean here. This is a disturbance here along the eastern side of the monsoon trough, and the general pattern here is that we have a monsoon trough extending from, say, Central America all the way back west towards Invest 92E, and that whole monsoon trough is being lifted northward by this upper trough here that helped lift Franklin north through Hispaniola yesterday. You can see that here. I'll show you on the European. This is the precipitable water map, and the contours being the mean sea level pressure. And you can see the general axis of the trough with southwesterly winds in general from the East Pacific into the Caribbean, turning to more northeasterly winds from around Cuba back towards the two East Pac invests. And this will propagate northwards, and you'll see this take place on the model. I'll outline it here on the model for this time, and then if we go out, say, 36 hours, here we are now on Saturday evening. We have the trough more positioned here with a potential system here developing in the Western Caribbean. Now, the European has been the most keen on development here for the system. And this product that I'm showing you here, this is a blend of 3 items here. We have the colored contours being the 850 millibar vorticity, the wind barbs being the 200 millibar flow, and the contours here, the blue lines, being the 500 millibar height. So if you go in time, you'll see the vorticity come in to the Western Caribbean. And as I talked about with Franklin, the pattern aloft does shift. So we start to see the ridging that's currently shearing Franklin move west as the upper low moves back into Mexico. So now you see, here's the vorticity associated with our area of interest in the Caribbean, and aloft we have general anticyclonic flow, a general light shear aloft. Now there is questions on exactly where does the system sit, as it will be sitting in the Caribbean during the weekend. So does it stall, say, in the Caribbean, or does it stall over land, like say over the Yucatan Peninsula. That could impact its short-term development, and a lot of models don't really depict the system developing too quickly within the next at least 2 days. As we get towards 5 and 7 days into early parts of next week, the system is forecast to move northwards as a trough digs in over the United States. That will help carry Franklin north towards Canada, and that will also bring the system out of the Caribbean and will be looking for potential tropical cyclone impacts here, primarily in Florida, but also in portions of Cuba and the Yucatan Peninsula. And after that, we could be looking at potential impacts for more of the southeastern United States and maybe the Bahamas as well. I'll show you the European run on this. So you can see the system generally sits there, as I talked about throughout the weekend, but as we get towards early part of the next week, you can see that we start to see development of the system, and we actually get a tropical storm on the model being carried north. Now, interestingly, something I do notice with this trough up north, there is strong winds here over the Carolinas, and if this storm is in a good position relative to this strong jet streak, we could potentially be seeing maybe some enhanced outflow from that, and that could lead to some intensification on the way towards the coastline. And we have seen in past that has allowed some intensification of the system, that or say something changes with the position of this trough and jet streak and actually just shears the system. This is a 5 days plus out, so there is a bit of uncertainty there. Point being that we are looking more and more likely to have some form of tropical entity here coming out of the Caribbean and getting towards the coastline of Florida next week. And the National Hurricane Center gives this about a 60% chance of developing right now. Now, on a solution where the system does not form, we have to look at the GFS for this, and I have to go back here. But you'll see the general same picture. The system lifts into the Caribbean, and here it is, stalled here in the Western Caribbean near the coastline of the Yucatan Peninsula. But something that the GFS shows is a scenario where the system is more strung out. You can see all this vorticity is not really concentrated like the European was. Like, take Franklin, for example. All that vorticity is bundled up pretty tightly, and that is pretty good for a tropical cyclone. But if you have it strung out like this, it's not good for tropical cyclone development. And this really does not manage to get developed on the GFS model until well after it's passed the United States. That would be a scenario where we might not see too significant of development in the Western Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico. But given the overall favorable environment, I would say that I would side more with the European here, and we are still more likely than not to see some form of tropical development here in the Gulf of Mexico and Western Caribbean Sea. Now, in terms of intensity, we can't get into that right now, so we really don't have a system formed, but right now, guidance really agrees on a tropical storm coming into the Gulf of Mexico, and if it intensifies some there, we'll have to see. And keep in mind, even if it does form, say, in the Gulf of Mexico and moves quickly into Florida, it could still develop fairly quickly into a tropical cyclone. Harold is a great example of that. As it came westward in the Gulf of Mexico, it formed pretty quickly off the coastline of South Texas, and we had a significant tropical storm come through there. So certainly something to monitor there. And for those in Mexico and in Cuba and in the United States, stay tuned to the National Hurricane Center, tropical weather outlooks and advisories, and stay tuned to local weather offices for the latest information on that storm. Now, brief mention of Invest 91E. You can see generally this system is very, very disorganized. We don't have much organized convection taking shape at all, and we really don't have a well-defined center to speak of. And guidance today has not really shown much confidence in this system developing into a tropical cyclone as they had once done. You can see the general pattern aloft is fairly favorable. We have some shear being impinged upon the storm. But there also might be some dry air. You can see that we have a lot of green here on the southern side of the system. This indicates that the upper levels are moist, but we might have some, say, drier mid-levels south of the system. And if an area of low pressure tries to form, it might be sucking up some of this dry air into the circulation, which might explain some of the convection that we're seeing really just be void for the most part from the system center. And the National Hurricane Center still gives us a 70% chance of developing. That's a high chance of development. This has come down a little bit, and I wouldn't be surprised if tonight we see chances come down a little bit more. as guidance really does not show too much forming out of this. But there is still potential that we get a tropical cyclone forming out of this, and it could absolutely come into Mexico. And for those along the coastline of Mexico, I recommend that you stay tuned to the National Hurricane Center and your local weather office as the system meanders offshore, as we could be looking at some adverse impacts here. Not expecting a big storm out of this. If it does form, it'll likely be a weak system overall due to the shear from the upper low that is expected to back away from Mexico, or rather from the Gulf of Mexico into Mexico. And generally, the main impacts would be maybe some tropical storm force winds and heavy rainfall along the coastline. As I mentioned, we're not really going to be going into detail on 92E, and this system, again, is going to track northwest and is likely to develop and remain out to sea. Now moving to the Western Pacific. This is a very long video, I know, but now we are here in the Western Pacific. We're on the final few systems. We're going to start off here in the eastern part of the basin. We've got Tropical Storm Damrey and Invest 92W here in the same general area. There's a bit of uncertainty here on exactly what's happening here. What I can figure out here from microwave passes is that we have some sort of a center of circulation that is probably from Damrey underneath this convection, though there are some questions of maybe is 92W trying to develop within this. Regardless of what happens here in this general complex, this whole thing is forecast to move northwest, and we might be looking at some impacts here in Japan towards next week as the system gets drawn north. Now, the general steering pattern looks fairly high confidence. We've got a ridge of high pressure here north of eastern Japan, and this will, east of northern Japan, and this will carry the storm northwards. Now, this is impacting the track on Tropical Storm Saola a little bit, as this is blocking this ridge up north from really being a significant influence on the system, and I'm going to go into detail on that shortly. Now, there is also potential tropical cyclone development here near the Mariana Islands, and this would be sort of from the same general system that spawned 92W and Damrey, and this system could develop after Saola. So we could be looking at another active period here in the Western Pacific, but it makes sense we are getting into peak season. So let's go in detail on Saola now. Now, this system is really sort of popped up out of nowhere. I'll go back to the big view to point out where this system came from. A few days ago, we had a thunderstorm complex here form south of Japan, and this system slowly drifted over southwest over the past several days, and we really did not have much model guidance supporting anything of that system. It just looked like a random area of low pressure that had developed. But since then, we had the system form into a tropical depression, and now it has moved further southwest and is now really slowly moving near Luzon. And now guidance is very strong on the system. We've seen a significant uptick in this, and now there is high confidence that this system will be our next significant typhoon in the Western Pacific. And we're looking at impacts potentially here, stretching from, say, the Japanese islands here to Taiwan, maybe even the coastline of China, and portions of the northern Philippines. Now, the general pattern right now is fairly weak steering flow. You can see, if I look at the 500 millibar flow map, and I'll have to go back to the beginning here. Oh, that is the beginning. But you can see here's Damrey and Invest 92W, and generally where our storm is here northeast of Luzon, there's not really any big steering features able to pick this system up. We have troughing way up north, that's not able to pick the system up. We have ridging way up north being blocked by Damrey and 92W. So really the system is at really what the low level flow or upper level flow is. And the general upper level flow is northerly. You can see by a large ridge here over eastern Asia. This will push the storm southwards over the coming days. Now, eventually, this system, Damrey and 92W, will clear out, and we'll see the pattern shift a little bit. We'll get this ridge to develop here east of Japan, further south, and we'll also get more troughing digging in further south. So we'll get more steering features to pull the system north. So we'll sort of had a weird track here, and I'll go to the zoomed in look here. Where the system is here now, it's probably going to dive south and then come back north. Now, of course, there are some questions here on exactly how far west or east the system is going to be when it comes back up north. You can see the GFS here is uncomfortably close to Luzon, and that would be a significant impact there. While the European has a system coming a little bit further east while it's making that loop, and then we have the system coming into Taiwan, maybe getting close to the southern Japanese islands there. There is that little bit of uncertainty, and we'll just have to see exactly how that pans out. Now, in terms of intensity, the environment overall is fairly favorable. Now, that ridge might be impinging a little bit of northerly shear upon the system. You can see if the center's here, a lot of the thunderstorm activity is on the southern side, so there might be some shear impinging upon it. But overall, it's also attributing to very high divergence on the western side of the system. That's fairly favorable, and the seasonal temperatures and oceanic heat content here is very warm. In fact, even with this system stalling here really over the coming days, it's likely not to deal with upwelling all too much overall, mainly because it's a smaller system, and the oceanic heat content is just so high in this region. Now, right now, the system looks pretty good, and this is a concerning look. I'll pause it at the end. One look that we do look for when we're analyzing tropical cyclones is what we call a curved band structure. So you can see what we have right now is that general curved band structure. We have this band of thunderstorms curving around the center of circulation here. The center of circulation is estimated by me to be right about there, and that seems to be around where it is with all the deep convection firing it around it. Now, overall, you also hear this called the shrimp look. This is a classic look that typically precludes rapid intensification with tropical cyclones. Mainly because in these patterns, you get all this deep convection starting to wrap around the eye and build an inner core structure. This is also a good feeder band to feed moisture into the eye and keep some dry air away from, say, outside sources from getting in, disrupting the inner core building process. Now, we have gotten a microwave pass earlier today. I don't have it pulled up right now. I might be able to, but the website is not, it's being blocked by a browser. It has some certificate issues, but the microwave pass, it showed that an inner core is being built pretty quickly by Saola. And I would not be surprised to see later this morning local time or into the afternoon hours, this become a typhoon in short order. And once it gets that center of circulation in order, assuming this wind shear does not really disrupt that too much and maybe push some dry air in, we are likely to see some significant intensification of this system, and it will likely become a strong typhoon off the coastline of the Philippines. Now, here's the track cone from Pagasa. I'll reload this to see if there is a new cone. No, it doesn't look, is that? This is a new forecast cone. All right. So yes, there is a new one. And this is their latest forecast. You can see forecasting intensification into a typhoon by Saturday. So this would be Saturday morning local time, 2 a.m., it becomes a typhoon offshore, and you can see it making this general loop like the models depict, and then tracking northwestwards. They seem to be taking more of an approach of the European model, but keep in mind, if you're in Luzon, you could absolutely still see the system come ashore or get very close to the coastline. It could deviate just a little bit farther west here. And alongside that, even if the system is offshore, look at how big the tropical storm force wind field is. It's not the biggest in the world, but with it being just offshore, paint that picture here. In that center point, you've got some tropical storm force winds along the coastline, and that could absolutely put some impacts onto Luzon. That's something to watch. And for areas in more of the Philippines and the islands further north, in Taiwan and Japan and China, my best recommendation right now is just to stay tuned to your local weather offices, Pagasa, and the Japan Meteorological Agency. They're going to have the best information ahead of this storm. I'll have future videos throughout this week and this weekend and in the next week as this system tracks through. Again, this is going to be likely another significant typhoon impacting the region this year. But that's all that I've got for today. Very, very busy tropics here, but it's peak of hurricane and typhoon season, so this is something to expect at this time of year. But stay safe, and for everywhere that I talked about today, in Bermuda, in Central America, in the Philippines. But that's all that I've got for now. Thanks for watching, and again, I'll have future uploads this week and this weekend and next week.